This is the biggest escalation the conflict has seen since the ceasefire 4 weeks ago. On the 4th of May, when a South Korean Panama-flagged cargo ship with 24 crew members, including 6 Korean nationals, on board was floating on the Strait of Hormuz, a sudden explosion had taken place in the engine room and the ship had caught fire on board, suspected to be a possible missile strike or a drone attack sent by the Iranians. The said suspicion was raised by the words of the US President Donald Trump, although the actual cause behind the fire still stands unclear and the investigation is ongoing. Even though the fire had been extinguished, as seen on a surveillance camera footage, it could take several days to tow the vessel to Dubai. Not only the South Korean vessel, but a handful of commercial vessels were reported to have been hit, and a UAE oil port was ablaze due to an Iranian strike. UAE, United Arab Emirates, the Gulf ally of the US, which has been attacked multiple times by Iran, said a tanker affiliated with ADNOC, its state-owned oil company, was attacked by 2 drones as it transited the Strait of Hormuz. 2,000 vessels, and among them, 26 South Korean vessels had been stranded since the beginning of the conflict around late February. Supplies had been running low, and the danger of staying at waters crowded with war weapons had left the sailors tensed. After the amount of stranded ships and the crew with them came to his attention, Trump had decided to launch an operation, giving it the name Project Freedom. This operation aimed at providing safe transit to commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. On the 4th of May, this operation was put into action. Who would have thought that this attempt of his would lead to the greatest escalation this war had seen since the ceasefire? For the good of Iran, the Middle East, and the United States, we have told these countries that we will guide their ships safely out of these restricted waterways so that they can freely and ably get on with their business, Trump said in a post on Truth Social, without specifying which countries had requested help. Many of the ships were running low on food and essentials needed for a large crew to stay in a sanitary manner for a while, and thus Trump had warned that anyone who dared to interfere with the transit will be dealt with forcefully, clearly indicating it towards the Iranians. But Iran in turn declared that the US lending a hand to the other countries was a violation of the ceasefire because it was obviously not too happy by the US. Statement: Project Freedom aimed to guide the ships through the Strait of Hormuz and give them a safe transit, or perhaps not. On the surface, it might all look like the president's goodwill, but the real reason behind such a proposal is to possibly gain the control of the narrow waterway. Offering other countries a safe passageway would be a good way to gain the support from other nations, right? A very clever tactic indeed. This seemingly colossal project is not that simple as getting a taxi past the strait. If only it were that simple, and the missile launchers, jets, and the military force didn't exist. Whatever the intention was, it had pointed towards one direction and one only: escalation. Trump's project now held definite heavy risk of the ceasefire being violated altogether if it was met with Iranian resistance. But despite the risk the project began, and as expected, Iran didn't fail to hold back. On the first day of the operation, 4th May 2026, the U.S. military assets in the region, including guided missile destroyers, more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft, and 15,000 troops were floating upon the nearby waters amidst the operation. The U.S. had to deal with the Iranian military attacks provoked by the U.S. statements and attempts to let the ships through. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Iran had attacked Oman on the same day and had waged 3 attacks on the United Arab Emirates. Following that, the U.S. military had said that 2 of the U.S. merchant ships had made it through the strait with the support of Navy-guided missile destroyers, possibly breaching the long blockade by the U.S. However, Iran denied that any crossings had taken place, though the shipping company Maersk said the Alliance Fairfax, a U.S., the flagged ship had exited the Gulf under U.S. military escort. Apparently, it was the first attempt to use military force since last month's ceasefire announcement to open the world's most important energy shipping route again, which Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has said can only happen with its permission. The cost of shipping insurance had also rocketed. For weeks, the U.S. Navy has blockaded Iran's trade by sea, which Iran has not been very happy with, and has chosen to see it as an act of war. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the U.S. had successfully secured a path through the critical waterway and that hundreds of commercial ships were lining up to pass through as Washington seeks to break a chokehold Iran has asserted on the Strait of Hormuz since the conflict start on February 28th. We know the Iranians are embarrassed by this fact. They said they control the strait. They do not, Hegseth said. During a Pentagon news conference, the U.S. military says it sank 6 Iranian small boats and intercepted Iranian crews, missiles, and drones after President Donald Trump sent the Navy to escort stranded tankers through the Strait of Hormuz in the day-old campaign. Several merchant ships in the Gulf reported explosions or fires on the first day of the operation. The civilian ships were being escorted by the U.S. Navy, or at least being attempted, as Iran had not held back and opened fire at the U.S. Navy. Iran had warned, stating that any U.S. forces attempting to enter the Strait of Hormuz will be fired upon, and had clearly proved their point. Iranian media also said a United States warship trying to transit the Strait of Hormuz had been hit with 2 missiles after ignoring the mentioned warnings. The unnamed warship had to withdraw from near the Iranian port of Jask and flee, according to the Fars news agency, which is affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. But the U.S. had denied the claim in a post on social media. Although U.S. had decided to launch the operation on its own military risk, it seems to have apparently backfired, at least initially. You would think if a safe passage was ensured, wouldn't the ships waiting to transit volunteer to pass through? But the expected didn't happen. There was no merchant ship traffic. Major shipping companies preferred to wait for an agreed end to hostilities before trying to cross the strait. The Strait of Hormuz is shifting from a high-risk transit zone into an operationally degraded maritime environment shaped by simultaneous military pressure, electronic interference, and constrained commercial movement, or possibly has already turned into. So, throughout the relay of attacks between the nations over the control of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. had continued its naval blockade despite the operation, preventing any ships to enter the narrow strait nor exit it. One way or another, it has maintained its power, as the blocked ships were a vital artery for global oil flows. This move has sharply reduced tanker traffic and forced vessels carrying Iranian crude to turn back, disrupting exports that normally account for millions of barrels a day. Iran has begun to reconstitute their missile and drone capabilities, possibly expecting the war to restart. It has also started digging up bombed entrances to underground bases housing munitions and equipment. The escalation of the conflict and the possible end of the ceasefire is nothing to be ignored. Surprisingly, after a single day of escalation, heavy firing, and a fight for gaining the control of the strait, the operation was put on hold. And it is said that there has been a talk of the possibility of the current conflict leading to nothing. Nonetheless, the entire global economy is at risk, and upon escalation, the risk goes up with it. After looking at the aftermath of the entire conflict and noticing the escalation could only either lead to war from this point or a complete truce the US president has. Given the talk of coming to terms a chance and put the operation on pause, with Pakistan acting as an intermediate, the countries are said to be having a discussion. Although the outcome has become completely unpredictable, it can be said if the said talks don't bring out a better outcome than the current state, there's no going back. The ceasefire would come to an end and the war resumes.